Good evening, everyone. My name is Dine Romero, and I'm the leader of Bath and North East Somerset Council. I'd like to welcome everyone to this evening for our Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration, which we have organised in partnership with Bath Interfaith Group, who I would like to thank for their assistance, as well as the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust for their information and the resources that we have used to plan this event. I would like to welcome the Right Worshipful, the Mayor of Bath, Councillor Amanda Rigby, who is joining us tonight, and welcome all of our special guests and speakers, and to welcome all of you at home who are joining us. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to the High Sheriff of Somerset, Mrs. Mary Claire Rodwell, and also to the High Sheriff of Bristol, Dr. John Manley. This is the first time we have held our Holocaust Memorial Day event virtually via Zoom, so there may be some technical issues, so please bear with us. If you find you're struggling with your connection, it can often help to leave and rejoin the event, but I hope that won't happen. Holocaust Memorial Day takes place each year on the 27th of January, and we will be joining many others across the UK and across the world as we come together for remembrance in a world scarred by genocide. Over the next hour, you will hear from a range of different speakers and also have the chance to reflect and remember whilst listening to music and poetry. Tonight, we remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust, alongside the millions of other people killed under Nazi persecution and in genocides that followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. The 27th of January is a significant date as it marks the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the largest Nazi death camp. That liberation was 76 years ago today. As we mark Holocaust Memorial Day 2021, the world is dealing with the global pandemic of COVID-19. It is a time of great change and uncertainty for all of us. Some of us have experienced the loss of a loved one, and many of us are experiencing hardships and anxiety from the separation from family and friends. Yet, this is also a time when so many people are bringing light to their neighbours and communities. For example, here in Bath and North East Somerset, over 2,500 people have volunteered through the Community Wellbeing Hub and other local networks and neighbourhood groups. Many have also volunteered through the National NHS Responder Scheme. In every corner of the country, community groups, charities and neighbourhoods have joined together to provide help to their neighbours and communities, a beacon of light and hope in these dark times. This amazing community response is linked to the theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2021, which is Be the Light in the Darkness. It encourages us all to reflect on the depths humanity can sink to, but also the ways individuals and communities have supported each other and resisted that darkness in the past. The utterly unprecedented times through which we are living currently are showing the very best of which humanity is capable of, but also in some of the abuse and conspiracy theories which are being spread on social media, the much darker side of our world as well. Recent events have reminded us that now, more than ever, we must remain vigilant against hatred and identity-based hostility. We are living in times when there are increasing levels of denial, division, and misinformation. This year's theme of Be the Light in the Darkness is a call to action for everyone marking Holocaust Memorial Day. It challenges us all to think about what we can each do to tackle divisions in our local communities and across the world. We can all stand in solidarity. We can choose to be the light in the darkness in a variety of ways and places, at home, in public, and online. In darkness, even a small light stands out, but many lights together are too strong to be extinguished and can dispel darkness completely. Every one of us has different talents and capabilities, but what is most important is the commitment we all make to do our best to stand up for those who are suffering and to confront hate, fear, and prejudice wherever we encounter it. Tonight, we remember the darkness of distortion to create hatred, the way that the Nazis encouraged people to fear Jewish people by stereotyping them as greedy, evil, and a threat to Germany. The way the Nazis also used propaganda to demonize disabled people who were cruelly portrayed as burdens on society. The way that gay men were portrayed as degenerates who would have a weakening effect on German society. How in Rwanda, propaganda broadcast on radio stations and printed in newspapers sought to dehumanize the Tutsi minority, calling them cockroaches and snakes, encouraging the Hutus to view them as less than human. Tonight, we can also reflect on the light of resistance in the darkness. Throughout history, people have shown incredible bravery by resisting, often at great risk to themselves. For example, the White Rose movement in Nazi Germany, whose leaders were executed after their capture in 1943, distributed leaflets calling for resistance to the regime. When the Nazis invaded Hungary in 1944, Bali Rax, a Catholic Hungarian singer and film star, chose to rescue 5 Jewish people, hiding them in her own home. She was arrested by the secret police in November 1944 and refused to give up their secret even after being interrogated for 2 weeks in harsh conditions. In Cambodia, at just 15 years old, Ronnie Yimsut, with over 200 other escapees of mass killings in the Tonle Sap area, attacked a Khmer Rouge garrison. They were armed with just sticks, stones, and a few knives against the modern weaponry of the regime soldiers. Despite heavy casualties in the initial attack, they fought for 3 days before managing to flee to the Thai border. Despite the personal danger they faced, these are some of the examples that throughout every genocide, individuals and groups have defied those regimes to save those they could. Choices like these are a beacon of hope and an inspiration for others to resist cruelty and hatred. Prejudice and hatred today, my apologies. Prejudice and hostility against people based on their identity continues to hurt people and communities here in the UK. The number of hate crimes recorded by the police in England and Wales rose by 10% between October 2018 and October 2019, for the 7th successive year since 2012. The highest rises were in crimes against disabled people, LGBTQ+ people, and those of different races. There have been increases in anti-Semitic incidences and anti-Muslim incidents in the UK. These records show there is much work for us to do. By coming together here tonight, we can make a commitment to step up and use every opportunity we have to tackle prejudice, discrimination, and intolerance wherever we encounter it. Each of us can be a light, working for a safer, better future for everyone. I would now like to invite Reverend David Musgrave from Bath Interfaith Group to speak.
Thank you, Dina. I want to begin by saying what an honour it is for the Bath Interfaith Group to be associated with this commemoration of a day which is necessarily secular in nature, but yet has profound religious significance. In our last event of 2020, as an interfaith group, we shared stories about the festivals of winter and light in different traditions. We noted that religious traditions originating in the Northern Hemisphere often had festivals around the moment of greatest darkness in midwinter. The Druids, who celebrated the winter solstice, the ancient Romans had their festival of Saturnalia, and scholars suggest that when the early Christians chose the time to celebrate the birth of Jesus, they deliberately chose the moment when the Roman Empire already had a festival. Only a few days earlier, Jews celebrate Hanukkah, the miracle of the sacred oil that kept burning for 8 days after the rededication of the temple in Jerusalem. And faiths with roots further east celebrate Diwali, with a similar explosion of light only a little earlier. The point seems to be a human need for hope at the time of greatest gloom, a reminder that the days will lengthen and spring will eventually come. From sharing in the seasonal ritual, people of all faiths have in many different ways drawn parallels with the realities of the world, seeing it as part of their religious calling to work for light to shine in the world. As Dina has reminded us, the past year has brought darkness on a scale not seen in most of our lifetimes. The COVID pandemic has been constantly before us. We've heard the pain of the bereaved. We've heard of the strain on NHS and care workers, worries about jobs and making ends meet among a far broader swathe of the population. And the foundations of society have been undermined in other ways, here and elsewhere, with a blurring of the sense of truth and honesty, promotion of an exclusive national identity, and a spread of random brutality. More and more we realize that lessons have not been learned, not even those of the Holocaust. Once we put emphasis on the otherness of different communities, rather than on our common humanity, the slippery slope begins. None of us are exempt. The echoes were there on the Capitol in Washington only 3 weeks ago. They're there in the reports from Xinjiang on the treatment of the Uyghurs, where forces of darkness, hatred, division, and fear seem to prevail. As in past centuries, religion has often played a part in the spread of hatred, scapegoating the other. I'm only too aware as a Christian of how from earliest times many in the church singled out Jews as figures of fear and hate, leading inexorably to the Holocaust. In our own generation, the same fears have been allowed to affect our perceptions of Islam. The Balkan Wars of the 1990s resounded with enmities reaching back centuries which had never been fully addressed. And even in Israel, Palestine, that land that is holy for such a large proportion of humanity, true peace and reconciliation seem as far away as ever. Yet if religious division is part of the problem, so can faith communities be part of the solution. Each religious tradition points to the light, to better human instincts, to what Martin Luther King called the beloved society. Out of the darkness of oppression and martyrdom can come not a call to revenge, but a search for the light, a new togetherness which will take humanity forward. This was the case after the deaths of King and of Mahatma Gandhi, after the Enniskillen bombing in Northern Ireland, after the 7/7 bombings in London. Think Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu in South Africa, reaching out to offer reconciliation on the basis of the truth of the past being acknowledged. And indeed, today in Israel, Palestine, there is much being done by people of faith and people of no faith to bridge those divides. The start is to turn to one another rather than turning away. As we live and work together as representatives of different faiths and of none, as we listen to one another's stories, respecting and learning from our different points of view, we also inspire one another with our common sense of a shared humanity. That light continues to shine through whatever darkness may come upon us. That, I believe, is truly the lesson for Holocaust Memorial Day. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I now invite Mick Josfix to introduce a piece of music recorded by his band, Ninotchka, especially for our event today.
Hello there. This first piece of music I'd like to play to you, both songs are from a tradition of Jewish music known as Klezmer, which is the Jewish music of the Ashkenazi people of Eastern Europe and Germany. So the very culture and music that Hitler sought to wipe out. This first song is dedicated to my late violin teacher, Nina Trott, and it's called Nina's Freilichs. Freilichs actually means a happy dance. But if you listen to the piece of music, it has very, very mixed emotions. Sometimes it seems very joyful, sometimes it seems very sad. It has a whole mix of emotions, and that's indicative of all klezmer music. It has this real range and mix of emotions, which I feel really reflects the culture that many European Jews lived through, especially through persecution. Yeah, I hope you enjoy this next song.
Thank you, Nick. That was really beautiful. I'd now like to introduce our special guests, Professor Yoav Ben-Shlomo and Dr. Iris Segal, to share with us the survivor testimony, drawing from the writings of his father, Yoav Ben-Shlomo.
Hello, Yoav. Before you start sharing your father's story.
Iris, you need to unmute yourself. Iris.
I thought I did it. Sorry. So, hello, Yoav. I'll start again. So, before you start talking about your father's experiences during the Holocaust, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you, Iris. So I actually live in Bristol rather than Bath, and I work at the medical school, Bristol Medical School, as a professor of clinical epidemiology, having trained initially in medicine. What I'd like to do is, if I just share my screen. Hopefully, you can all see a picture of my father. Is that right? Good, thank you. So this is a picture of my father. This is him in his 80s. As you can see, he sadly died 4 years ago at the age of 88. And the first really obvious thing actually relates to my surname. So I've always known my father as Yoav Ben-Shlomo, but actually that's not the name he was born with. When he was born, he was called Wilhelm Bergmann, which is a fairly Germanic name. And having survived the Holocaust, made his way to what was then Palestine and then Israel, he did not wish to have a German-sounding name given the atrocities that had been committed. So he changed his name to Ben-Shlomo. So for those of you who may not know, Ben is Hebrew for son of. So his surname means the son of Shlomo. And I will go on and show you his father, whose name was Shlomo Bergman. So first of all, I inherited the name. But the second thing is actually I inherited growing up in England. I was actually born in Tel Aviv in Israel, but from the age of 3, we came to the United Kingdom. And if I just explain why that was courtesy of this gentleman on the left. So this gentleman on the left is Professor Walter Lecker. He died a few years ago. He was also a Jewish emigre. His family was smart enough, they left Germany in 1938. So they didn't experience the Holocaust directly. And he died at the grand age of 97. And he was a real scholar and expert. This is one of the many books he produced. He was a Holocaust historian. And this lovely building here on the right, which is in Bloomsbury Square in London, is originally known as the Vena Library, now known as the Vena Holocaust Library. He was the first director. And if you are a scholar of all Holocaust, because it's not just limited to the Jewish experience, you want to go to this place because they have an incredible archive library. However, Walter Lecker was writing a book, and he invited my father, and hence the family, to come to London to assist him with the book, because my father, you might have spotted, if I just go back, for those of you eagle-eyed, you might have spotted a huge number of books in the background. That's my dad's library in my parents' home. And my father was a great reader, great scholar. He was also a linguist in that he could speak 6 or 7 languages. So he was born in Poland, he spoke Polish, but he spoke fluent Russian, Yiddish, German, Hebrew, English. And he therefore helped Walter Lecker as a research assistant for his book, for which he was thanked. But after that, when he finished the book, we never went back to Israel because he then got a job working for the Jewish Chronicle, which is the longest lasting British Jewish newspaper, founded in 1840. And I'll come back to that because that's important for the story. So that's one of the second factor. The third factor, which I'll come on to, is my chosen career of medicine, but I'll come back to that.
Thank you.
We've been muted again, Iris.
I don't know what happens. It goes back there. So how did you learn about your father's Holocaust experience, and what impact has it had on you?
Yeah, thanks. So, as I've discovered, many Holocaust survivors, my father very rarely talked about his experience. As children, of course, we were fascinated. We knew he was a Holocaust survivor, and we always wanted to know more information, but actually he very rarely spoke about it at all, though he knew a huge amount about the Holocaust. I particularly remember the times he would tell us a little bit was on the Jewish festival of Pesach or Passover, which again, for those of you who know, Passover celebrates the liberation or redemption of the Jews who were slaves in Egypt to the promised land. And when we would sit, so traditionally families sit together around what's known as the Seder table, and we have special food, symbolic food, and sometimes he would talk a bit about what actually happened. But there were little dribs and drabs. We never really knew very much until he published this article from December to May. Now, some of you may have spotted, this was actually published in the Jewish Chronicle. He wrote for them. It was published in May the 5th, 1995. There was a reason for that, because May the 5th, 1995 was the 50th anniversary of VE Day, actually 8th of May, where Europe was liberated. It was the end of the war in Europe. And the Jewish Chronicle commissioned a few people to write articles about their memories of the war. So my father wrote this article, and of course in this article, he provided a lot more detail, and that's exactly the article I will, in a little while, actually read to you, which describes his experiences. But before I do that, I just need to set a little bit of the context. So my father was born and grew up in a village called Otynia. When he was born, it was part of Poland, so he was regarded himself as Polish. However, after the Second World War, with the reconstruction of the borders, it became part of the Ukraine. So today, if you want to go and visit it, it's actually in Ukraine, because it was in the sort of southeast of Poland. It was a small village, about 5, 6, 7,000 inhabitants, and it had quite a large Jewish minority. As you can see, in 1913, there were 2,000 of the 5,000 were Jews. There were quite a lot of Jewish inhabitants. And when the Nazis came in, they did what they did in lots of other places. They put all the Jews together and essentially created a ghetto, and they were rounded up. There isn't a huge amount of historical information about what happened to the Jews of Otynia. Most of the literature says that the majority were actually taken to a nearby forest where they had to dig their own graves, and they were then shot into those graves. Some, however, were deported to Belzec concentration camp, which was the nearest camp to Otynia. Not surprisingly, the synagogues were destroyed, and I just have a few images which I think may help you get a feel. So these are some things you can find on the internet. So this is a church in Otynia. I'm not sure if that's the station house. These are the buildings. Particularly wanted to highlight this picture. This is the remnants of the Jewish cemetery. As you can see, not very well kept, and for some reason they put a power line in the middle of the cemetery, not very respectful. But I want to go on to my father's family, again, to set the context for the story. You asked me what was the impact of my father's experience on me? So, like all parents, a very big impact, but he certainly suffered emotionally from the long-term consequences of being a survivor. As you will hear, he and his father endured prolonged periods of starvation where they had very little food because they hid together in a forest in Poland. And my father always had a very strange attitude to food. He liked food, but he often ate not to satisfy a hunger, but more to satisfy a need, because he would never know where the next meal would come from. So even though we lived in a secure environment, he still ate as if that was the case. He also had a lifelong paranoia of anything to do with authority. So filling in tax returns or whatever would really stress him out. And again, one can totally understand that. And sadly, despite my efforts, he would never go back to Poland. He loved talking in Polish, in the Polish language. He loved watching films that showed him the woods and forests of his childhood. But when he was younger and I said, oh, let's go and visit your birthplace and so on, he could not face going back. So it certainly had a long-term traumatic effect on him. Let me just show you and explain the people in this picture. So that is my father as a young child. I'm not sure exactly how old he was. I'm assuming he looks about 9 or 10. This lady here, sadly, that was his mother, my paternal grandmother called Berta, who was shot by the Gestapo in 1942. What happened was they went around all their Jewish homes and they essentially looted and pillaged anything valuable like silver or gold candlesticks for the Sabbath. Well, Berta had a lovely gold ring on her finger from her wedding ring, and they said, give us the ring. And she said, no, I refuse to give you my wedding ring. And that meant that the Nazis or Gestapos just shot her there and then. So she sadly died. Of all the people in this picture, this gentleman here, who was her older brother, he amazingly did survive with his mother. That's the lady here. And he also made his way to Israel, where he lived for many years. Sadly, all the other women in the picture were all killed. Now, my father's father, my paternal grandfather, Shlomo Bergman, is not in the picture. I'm assuming he may have taken the picture. This is his picture, taken many years later in Israel. And he was a doctor. And I said that was rather important because when I was a little boy, about 8 or 9, I was ruffling through the drawers of my parents, in the cupboard, and I found a beautiful gold plaque that clearly went on a door, and the writing was in Hebrew, and I couldn't work it out because my Hebrew is not that great. So I asked my mother, what does the plaque say? And she says, in Hebrew, this says, Dr. Shlomo Bergman. This was the plaque he used to have on the door of his surgery. He was a general practitioner. And obviously when he died, they took it. So I looked at the plaque and I thought, oh, this looks rather beautiful. When I grow up, I want to be a doctor. And my mother was delighted and encouraged me. And in fact, that was my chosen career. And as I said, I now work as a medical researcher at Bristol University. So my grandfather, who sadly I never met, he died when I was 2 years of age, influenced my life. But more importantly, he was the main reason my father and he survived, as I shall explain in the story.
I guess through your story, Yoav, are you going to tell us also about the theme of today, of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day, which is Be the Light in the Darkness?
Yeah. So Dean has already talked about being the light in the darkness. And as you will hear in the story, several people were instrumental in how my father and his father survived. I'm sure there was also a lot of good luck as well. But as you will hear, the local mayor and various other non-Jewish Polish people helped them survive, sometimes for maybe perhaps selfish reasons, but at the end of the day, it didn't really matter because they saved their lives. And so I'm going to be delighted now to share you the story that my father wrote. So just to point out, when I say the word I'm speaking in the voice of my father, not in my voice, okay? So the story is called From December to May. It was the tank battle in the Ukraine that decided my fate. Had the Russian victory been less quick and less decisive, I would not have survived. When I think of VE Day, I think mainly of a train journey, which, thanks to the vagaries of the Soviet railway system, took me appropriately past the site of one of the great battles of the war. I started to count the burnt-out German tanks. A fellow Jewish passenger, probably a communist, tugged at my sleeve excitedly. Stalin, 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 it is Stalin after all. A Kleinigkeit, small matter to defeat Hitler. And who did it? He did it. What are you doing? Still counting the tanks? 100 tanks, more or less. What difference does it make? The war is over. Hitler is dead. The Russians are in Berlin. That's all that matters. No? Did you ever think you would live to see this day? No, I did not. I had hoped against hope, but could hardly believe it. The Gestapo had beaten me up when I refused to tell them where my father was when they came to arrest him. They had driven a truck at me because I'd run after it when they did arrest him, only to release him later after the intervention of the local Ukrainian mayor. I'd been shot at by Gestapo submachine guns, pursued by the Waffen-SS, the Ukrainian police, Ukrainian Nazis, Polish extortionists, and ethnic Germans. But in almost 3 years on the run, they had failed to get me. I had defied the Nazis, but it was a close thing. Counting German tanks through the window of the train, I remembered gazing through another window, and I could hear again my father's voice. It all depends on whether you can do it quickly and relatively painlessly. I do not answer, but carry on staring through the window. I have decided to jump into the well head first. I shall probably lose consciousness on the impact and drown. I can't do it, I say. It is December the 31st, 1943. We are sitting in a cowshed in a Polish village at the foot of the Carpathian Mountains. Outside, it is nearly 20 below zero. Tadek, the Polish peasant, who has until now given us shelter, is no longer prepared to do so, nor is anyone else. In the circumstances, my father and I have decided to end our lives at 7 a.m. the next morning, the first day of what looks like being the bleakest of years. My father speaks again. It is possible we won't be killed outright. This could happen if the well is nearly dry, and falling down the shaft we'll merely be injured, in which case we will be tortured for hours or days until we are dead. God, do I really have to teach my child how to kill himself? It is 8 p.m., 11 hours to the end. Through the window, I can see the village youth gathering in the pure whiteness of the landscape to hold a New Year's Eve party. I won't kill myself that way, I protest. I shall go back into the forest. It'll only take a few nights to freeze to death in this weather. At least that way, it'll be in my sleep. By 10 p.m., the party next door is in full swing. I can hear them singing. I believe I know exactly what will happen to me. From time to time, the local peasants discover the frozen corpses of fugitive Jews in the surrounding forest. Midnight and next door, they are toasting the new year. 7 hours till my father's deadline. I find myself thinking about a conversation in the ghetto with a man regarded as a superfixer. He's wearing a badge on his jacket, or Stoffverfalsung. This exempts him from deportation, since as a scrap metal dealer, he is useful for the German war effort. A rude, impatient man, he is asking me what money I have, what foreign currency with which to help my father get away. I have none, I tell him, only zlotys. He screws up his face contemptuously and makes a crude wiping gesture. There is only one thing you can do. Your zlotys may be just enough to buy an effective poison. You'll still have the chance to die in some dignity and to be given a Jewish burial. I shall try to escape. Ah, you have no chance. Look, I have some money, plenty of connections. If I can't find someone who will give me shelter, what chance have you got? 5 hours to go. The party is in full swing. They are dancing a tango. It is getting more and more boisterous. In September 1942, my father found shelter for both of us with the family of one of his patients whose wife was suffering from a terminal illness. With so many Jewish doctors murdered, medical services were scarce. My father treated the woman for several months, but after her death, we had to leave and live in the forest. We were helped by a number of local people, mostly members of the Polish underground, following the orders of the London-based Polish government in exile. Some were my father's patients, and some were simply shrewd enough to realize how useful my father could be to them as a doctor. In November 1943, the mood changed. After Kiev was liberated by the Russians, the locals realized they would soon be returned to the Soviet fold rather than be part of Poland. With a harsh winter setting in, there was not a single peasant it seemed willing to put us up, except for Tadek. Tadek was something of a socialist. My father met him secretly in the forest. Despite the risks, he agreed to take us in for winter, but by the end of December, he had changed his mind. The year was ending for us without friends, money, or shelter. In the cold approach of the New Year's dawn, I'm dreaming of a pre-war summer. I'm trying to ride a bicycle much too big for me. Everybody's laughing. Someone's saying, you have plenty of time to learn how to ride that bike. You are wrong, I'm shouting. There is no time left. The sound of heavy feet on the stairs wakes me. The door opens and Tadek enters carrying a tray with hot black coffee and homemade cakes. My father looks at me in astonishment. It is more than 3 years since anyone has offered us coffee or cakes. Is this the condemned man's last meal? Good news from the front, said Tadek. You can remain with us. Happy New Year. The coffee scalds my fingers. It is real. This is no dream. He's no longer afraid, says my father. He carried the tray across the courtyard without caring if the neighbors saw him. They would certainly have been suspicious. After all, who celebrates the new year with coffee and cake in a cowshed? No more talk of suicide. Instead, we remain under Tadek's care until a few weeks later he knocks at our window shouting, "The Russians are in Poland." As the last of the scorched wrecks of the German tanks receded into the Ukrainian countryside, I watched Russian soldiers celebrating in the May sunshine. Suddenly, there seemed nothing on the horizon but an endless steppe and an endless spring.
Thank you so much, Yoav, for sharing this testimony of your father. Just listening to it makes my hair rise. It's so emotional. I guess the bravery of people, of other people, risking their own lives does help. And it goes to show that every action of an individual can make such a huge difference to the lives of others. So really, thank you for sharing it with us.
It's a pleasure to honor the memory of my father by sharing his story with other people.
Thank you so much, Eris and Yoav. That was such a moving testimony. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. So we now move on to the lighting of the candles, and I shall be asking our special invited guests to light a candle of remembrance. For this section, you may find it useful to change your Zoom settings to gallery view if you're able. You may also wish to join us by lighting a candle of your own at home. So I will now invite Jane O'Hara from Bath Baha'i Community to light a candle to remember all those who were murdered in the Holocaust and subsequent genocides, and those who still face persecution today because of their religion or belief. Thank you. I will now invite Palwasha Sabori to light a candle on behalf of all those who were murdered in the Holocaust or other genocides, and all refugees who have been forced to flee their homes and seek refuge in other countries. I invite Sarah Banks, Chair of the Council's Disabled Workers Group, to light a candle to remember all disabled people who were targeted by the Nazi regime and those who have experienced his hate crime in more recent times. I invite Rob Mitchell from Black Families Education Support Group to light a candle to remember the young people who were murdered in the Holocaust and subsequent genocides, and all those who have experienced prejudice and hate because of their race, their nationality, or their ethnicity. I invite Louise Madden, Chair of the Council's LGBT+ staff group, to light a candle to remember all the lesbian and gay people who were targeted by the Nazi regime, and all those in society who experience prejudice and hate because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Finally, I would now like to invite Molly Harding from Unison to light a candle on behalf of trade union members who were targeted by the Nazi regime. Thank you. I'd now like to invite everyone for a minute's silence while we reflect, and we will then listen to another piece of music from Ninotchka entitled Mein Ruheplatz. So we'll have a minute's silence now. Thank you. So I invite Nick to start the recording, please. Thank you.
Don't look for me where birds are singing. You will not find me there, mein Schatz. At the machines where lives are withered, dorten ist mein Ruheplatz. Dorten ist mein Ruheplatz. Don't look for me where leaves are springing. You will not find me there, mein Schatz. I am a slave where chains are ringing. Dorten ist mein Ruheplatz. Dorten ist mein Ruheplatz. Nicht sucht mich wo die Vögel singen, du findest mich dort, nicht mein Schatz. Als klar bin ich, wo Ketten klingen, dort ist mein Ruheplatz, dort ist mein Ruheplatz. Love me truly, come to me, mein lieber Schatz. Lift my heavy heart from sorrow, oh make it sweet, my resting place. Make it sweet, mein Ruheplatz.
Thank you, Nick. I think everyone will have had some form of emotional response to that piece of music. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what that music was about.
Yeah, so it's a very beautiful Klezmer song that I've loved for many years. It's actually was written by a Jewish emigre to America in 1911 called Morris Rosenfeld, and he was actually writing about a tragedy called the Triangle Factory Fire, which was a factory fire that happened in New York, where 142 Jewish girls, mainly Jewish girls, died in a garment factory because all the factory owners kept the doors locked to stop the girls from stealing fabric. So they all perished because they couldn't escape the building. And even though it's a song that predates the Holocaust and doesn't address genocide directly, I always felt that Holocaust Memorial Day is about more than simply just remembering those people who tragically lost their lives during the genocides of World War II, but it's also a call for us to make sure that never happens again and be vigilant against signs of discrimination and hatred in our own times, whether that be war crimes or systematic oppression or discrimination like the people in that factory faced. So it's by celebrating the sort of diversity in our community and all taking individual action to stand against things like fascism, white supremacy, and discrimination that we can, truly honor the memory of those who lost their lives in the Second World War.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that explanation. I'd now like to invite Anne Cullis to read a poem for us. Anne, would you like to read the poem?
We Remember Them by Sylvan Carmans and Rabbi Jack Reamer. At the rising of the sun and at its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them. When we have achievements that are based on theirs, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them.
Thank you, Anne. And thank you to everybody for joining us today in this Holocaust Memorial Day. We need to remember to be vigilant against discrimination and hatred in these times, as well as remembering what has happened in the past. I'd like to thank all of our special guests for their part in today's event, and also everyone working behind the scenes to make this event a truly special one. If you'd like to re-watch this event or share with friends or family, then please go to the Council's YouTube channel and you'll find the details of that on the screen now. So finally, may I thank everybody once again for attending and wish everyone a very good night. Thank you.